Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, the 2021 Tech Study, Bridging the Digital Divide, hosted by Convenience Store News and sponsored by Hughes Network Systems. All C-store retailers are increasing their technology budgets, but small and medium-sized chains must pick their spots, according to the 2021 CS News Tech Study. I'm Don Longo, Editorial Director of Convenience Store News, and I'll be your moderator today and presenter. I'd like to start by covering a few housekeeping items before we begin. The content of this webcast has been reviewed by our editorial staff. However, the views of the speakers and their organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Convenience Store News or its publisher, Ensemble IQ. One of our goals is to make this session as interactive as possible. You can use the Q&A function on the left side of your screen below the presenter headshots to ask questions throughout the webinar. I'll hold these questions until the conclusion of the presentation and then pose them on your behalf. Your identity will remain confidential to the audience. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, we will follow up with you after the session concludes by email. You can also use this section if you have any technical questions about the webinar itself, and you will get a direct reply from our webinar producer. And the slides of this webcast are also downloadable from this same area. At the end of the event, we'll have a webcast evaluation survey. We encourage you to provide feedback using this feature. If you wish to review this webcast or share it with your colleagues, a replay of this web seminar will be available within 2 hours from many platforms, including smartphones and tablets. So now on to our webcast, the 2021 Tech Study, Bridging the Digital Divide, sponsored by Hughes Network Systems. Despite difficult business conditions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, convenience retailers this year once again increased their spending on technology. C-store operators invested in implementing and enhancing their social media platforms, their websites, adding digital monitors inside the stores, digital loyalty programs, and mobile apps, among other technology solutions. The 2021 Convenience Store News Tech Study revealed that small and large operators had significantly different responses to spending during the pandemic. Whereas 21% of large chains sped up the expansion of existing technology, just 4% of small operators did so. And 38% of large operators accelerated implementations of new technology compared to just 24% of smaller operators. In this webcast, I'll be joined by an expert in retail technology trends, Tim Tang of Hughes Network Systems. With a background in engineering and human organizational studies, Tim has degrees on both sides of his brain. He has over 20 years of professional experience in developing enterprise solutions, and he is keenly interested in the intersection of technology and humanity. As a director at Hughes, Tim actively engages in various enterprise markets, including C-stores, retail, restaurant, and banking finance, in order to fully unlock the business value of technology. Tim will join me as we explore highlights of the 2021 technology study and examine how smaller retailers can bridge the digital divide. Among the topics we will cover are EMV compliance, what opportunities are driving investments in the coming year, and the state of frictionless technology. So let's get started. Let's take a look at the next slide. The role of technology in the convenience store industry and its impact on retailers' future plans continually evolves based on current needs, emerging innovations, and the state of the industry itself. The 2021 Convenience Store News Technology Study examines the current convenience technology landscape and the ongoing evolution that lies ahead. Retailers are making plans to increase their tech investment to improve everything from data security to the customer experience. Tim, welcome aboard. What was one thing in the survey findings that really stood out for you?
Hey, Don, thank you very much for having me. This survey is going to be a very useful tool, I think, for the industry. It covers a lot of, quite a bit of ground in terms of what C-store operators have spent their monies on and what they're about to spend their monies on. What I was keenly interested in is something that you alluded to a little bit earlier, though, the difference in spending as it correlates to the size of the operator. The pretty meaningful disparity between what small and medium-sized operators are doing versus their larger big brothers and sisters.
Great, great. Yeah, I would agree. That was one thing that really came out in the study. Let's look at changes in the technology budget from 2019 through 2021. From 2019 to 2020, 71% of study participants reported increasing their technology budget, which encompasses everything from hardware and software to IT staff, cloud subscription fees, consulting, and more. This year, 83% expect to spend just as much or more on technology and automation as they did in 2020. So the next slide looks at the current versus future tech implementation. Much of retailers' current involvement in technology is directly related to customer interaction, such as social media, which is the most widely implemented technology today, followed by consumer-facing websites. And if we look at the next slide, we see that other customer-focused technologies, such as digital monitors inside the store, email marketing, and data analytics platforms are also fairly widespread. Looking to the future, retailers most frequently cited text messaging to customers at 40%, email marketing 37%, and GPS geolocation alerts, also 37%, as the technologies they're most likely planning to add. The planning to add line is the yellow bar, by the way. So Tim, what are your thoughts on how tech spending is increasing and on why retailers appear to be focused on these specific areas?
There's a couple of things that are very interesting here. Whenever I see a big number like a 71% increase, the first thing that comes to mind is 71% of what? One of the things that I've come to respect about the C-store industry is in some cases, it's just wide portfolio in terms of wide spectrum of adoption, in terms of you have your technology leaders who are very heavily invested into technologies. And then you have on the other end, basically technology minimalists, for lack of a better term. And so a 71% increase on the minimalist side could be a very seemingly dramatic number, but 71% of a very small number is still a rather small investment to some extent. So I'm very interested in understanding the backstory underneath that. The other piece of this is we look at some of the big gaps, and social media being the one. That's one where a very obvious narrative comes through, right? Social media, Facebook, Twitter, and the like is a very easy way for operators to basically make their brands known, to cultivate an audience and communicate, promotions and kind of special events that are happening in their locations. But what I find to be very interesting is that as I look at kind of the layout here is taking consideration of the yellow on top of the red as it relates to the red, right? Because if going back to the social media, 69% versus 20%, pretty dramatic ratio, kind of revealing the maturity of the adoption of social media. But then looking here now to the data analytics platform, or even, as you alluded to, the text media messaging platforms, these are initiatives that don't have nearly the maturity from previous implementations and have a very significant or meaningful. So I see, a story in the ratios between these two numbers kind of revealing for us kind of where the momentum is and where the real focus is as it relates to technology initiatives.
That's really insightful. Thanks, Tim. Next slide is on mobile ordering and apps. More than a third of convenience retailers currently offer mobile ordering through their website, up from 19.6% a year ago, while just over a quarter offer mobile ordering with an app. Apps are likely to become the more popular option in the future, as 56% of retailers that don't currently offer ordering by app say they plan to do so in the next year. So Tim, how important is mobile ordering in general, and then perhaps more importantly, what's needed to make it happen successfully?
I think your second question is actually a very interesting one. So mobile ordering, for all industries, retail, restaurants, banking, anything, is key. But in the C-store industry particularly, it's quite challenging. It's quite challenging for a number of reasons. If we look over the past few years, most of the major oil brands have already implemented some sort of mobile pay solution at the dispenser, at the pump. And the big challenge as we look at the adoption of that has been rather modest. So it's a meaningful challenge even at the major oil kind of brand level to get consumers to basically adopt these solutions. And then as we start to think through now on the individual operator, what makes C-store unique from retail and restaurants is we got multiple brands at play. We have the forecourt where you have the major oil brand driving the consumers to the site. And then you have the retail side of the business, which is where all the profitability, for the large extent, for the C-store operator rests. And so the question and the challenge now, as we think about mobile ordering, is that it's the major oil brand that's bringing the traffic to the site. Now, the next question becomes, how do I deal with that dual brand or dual mobile brand dilemma of promoting and getting the customer to understand that, hey, there's a real opportunity here inside the retail brand, inside that single site operator's C-store brand, for example. So as we think about mobile ordering, C-store is a unique animal in the sense that it's not just about a customer experience, on site. It's a multi-brand, multi-mobile ordering application challenge. And my encouragement to all the operators is to not underestimate how difficult it is to get a consumer to basically adopt your solution, to get a consumer to install your app on their phone. There is a meaningful fight for the real estate on an end user's cell phone. And so in that kind of mindset, we want to think about this as a kind of building a relationship and think about, how do I get the consumer in stages to a point where they're actually willing to give me space on their mobile device.
Yeah, you have to earn it, right?
You have to earn it. You have to earn it.
Great. Let's look at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on technology development. I mean, COVID-19 has affected so many things in all retailing and in the whole world in the last almost 2 years now. But small and large operators appear to have had significantly different responses to the pandemic, possibly due to small operators having more limited resources to allocate to tech development overall. 21% of large operators sped up the expansion or enhancement of existing technology compared to just 4% of small operators. And 38% of large operators sped up implementation of new technology versus 24% of small operators. Tim, how do you feel this gap impacts smaller operators, and what should small and medium-sized retailers do to compete more effectively?
I'll tell you that this chart by far, and they are all very good, but this chart by far got most of my attention because immediately the first thought that came to mind was, how much of a difference did COVID-19 actually make on the results that we're seeing here? If there were no pandemic, and we did this survey too as well, how different would it really be? Because there's a couple of dynamics that are played out, and I do recognize that there's probably going to be some kind of moderating effect in terms of just the rapid acceleration of technology that was required in order to respond to COVID. But at the same point, there are some fundamental problems and differences between the small operator and the large operator. When we think about technology, one of the core issues here is the integration of the tech stack. It's all these different applications that are critical elements and are parts of the digitization of the C-store. And if I were to put my finger on where the greatest pain point is, it sits at the integration of all these apps. And a large operator can go to a supplier and say, listen, I've got 500, 5,000 some C-stores, and I need you to make these adjustments I need you to talk to this app, and it will be done for them. They can wave their hands and it'll be fine. But for the small operator, the challenge has always been they don't carry that kind of business pull. And so for a small operator of a single site, 3 sites, 5 sites, what they see is essentially what they get. And the fundamental challenge here is then how do they build their tech stack? And with the increasing digital dependence, if you will, of the customer experience, the employee engagement, the retail operations, all those things depend on digital. So with that growing digital base, how is a small operator to play? I would say that some recommendations or some things to think about. One is start by first watching what the larger operators are doing. In many cases, they are driving a lot of the adoption that you need. They've already forced, in many cases, most of the leading applications to integrate with each other. And so take advantage of work that's already been done. But two is to also focus, more importantly, not just in the here and now, but also down the road in terms of your roadmap. And that is another story altogether. The play there is to focus on those solutions that have committed and adopted industry standard APIs. Because if they've integrated with APIs, now you have a fighting chance to as a audience. I mean, this industry, think about it, 150,000 C-stores, 90,000 of them are single site operators. And that is a huge population that if with standard APIs, could represent a meaningful market opportunity to any vendor. So I would encourage the small operators not only to look at what's already been done, but to also focus on where the standard APIs have been accepted, adopted, and focus on those solutions, give those solutions greater weight, because they not only deal with the problems of today, but more importantly, they're going to deal with problems of tomorrow.
And I'm sure there's a lot of help to be provided by their technology solution providers. That can help them understand these APIs and standards, and even organizations like Connexus, which is all about technology standards across the industry. It would be good to tie into those organizations to understand what's going on.
A very easy way for operators to get an understanding of what's happening, what's going on, are these associations. And Connexus is one of my favorite places to actually see the development and the ongoing emergence of the APIs actually being formed and developed. And I think your point is well taken, that the vendors are very much motivated to help you through this. And so, it can be intimidating. The tech stack for most C-store operators, it's, their skill is running a C-store operation, selling gas, cokes, and smokes. Technology is not necessarily in that portfolio. But at the same point, you can get help. There's a lot of people, a lot of parties, ecosystem providers that are very motivated to help you through this. And so there's a lot of opportunities like these kinds of webinars where you can get the fundamentals, enough of an understanding to actually make some competent decisions.
Great. All right, let's move on to the next topic, which is something we've been researching and talking about for the last several years. Excuse me. So let's talk about EMV compliance. Despite being well past the April 2021 deadline that shifted outdoor EMV liability to convenience store and gas station operators, 58% of respondents are not yet fully EMV compliant at both their in-store POS and fuel pumps. And looking at the next slide shows that among those not yet in full compliance, 60% expect to reach full compliance by the end of 2021, which is right around the corner, by the way. More than a quarter, however, don't expect to reach full compliance until sometime after 2022. Tim, how about telling us why the liability risk to retailers who aren't EMV compliant is so huge? And then maybe for those that have yet to become compliant, tell us a few of the options they have. What are some of the pros and cons of MSMPs, full-blown pump replacements, retrofit kits, et cetera? What are your thoughts on that?
This is an issue that has been near and dear to the whole industry's heart for the better part of 6 years. I mean, it goes back to 2015, goes back to multiple delays, and it's been kind of this kick the can mentality. And unfortunately now we're at a point where we've kicked the can a little too far. For a lot of, and this is actually, really quite relevant to the previous slides where we were talking about the difference between the small operators and the large operators. One of the things I've noticed about this industry is that when it comes to EMV compliance, it is the digital divide, if you will, or the lack of compliance is not evenly distributed. it is much more heavily weighted toward the smaller operators versus the larger operators. The larger operators had much more to lose. And so what I saw over the past, call it 3 years, 5 years particularly, is most of the larger operators had their act together 2, 3 years ago. It was the smaller operators that have kind of held back and waited. And what we're seeing now is that post the April deadline is, we're kind of just beyond that sweet spot, if you will. Here we are in November, 5 months later, 6 months later. And what's really kind of intriguing now is that this is the moment, the sweet spot, if you will, for the chargebacks to start to arrive. And so what we've been seeing these past 2-3 months is that smaller operators are now suddenly seeing the chargebacks. They're getting the bills in the mail. It was a process, right? From the moment of the fraud to take place at the dispenser, for it to get to the banks, for it to get to the major oils, and then for it to get to the small operators. We're at the tail end of that 4-month little journey here, and now the operators are starting to see those chargebacks for the first time, and it's several hundred, several $1,000s in many cases too as well. So this is a major pain point. It's going to undermine for the small operator community, especially because so many of them are not compliant in this case. As we think about what to do at this point in time, well, the cheapest solution is a retrofit kit, right? Replace the electronics, the CRINs that you have at the dispensers, and by far that'll be the quickest, easiest way for you to get up to speed. The challenge here is you need to move quickly because there's a rather long line, depending on which markets you're in, to get not only the equipment but also the technicians out to your site to get the work done. As you think through this, it's a matter of getting, and then obviously there's also the opportunity to replace the full-blown dispenser. And generally, a rule of thumb, 7-9 years. If it's more than 7-9 years old, it's probably time for you to think about replacing that full dispenser if you can afford it. It opens up, in addition, many more opportunities to set you up for the engagement. So we want to think about kind of the roadmap of the business of C-stores. C-stores are struggling right now. There's a decline in traffic coming to the C-stores, higher fuel mileage, emergence of EVs, the decline in tobacco sales. I mean, these things are all kind of coming together in one thing. And so as you think about your capital investments into your C-stores, improving that pump to improve the conversion of the forecourt traffic into retail customers, it's got to be very first and foremost on your mind. It's going to be the key to your strategy of how to grow a healthy retail business, how to grow and maximize and take advantage of your high profitable kind of food business too as well. So the dispenser, the full-blown dispenser upgrade is not just an EMV question. It's also a question of how do you play in the future in a world that is going to be less about fuel and more about food to a large expense. My encouragement to you as you think through all your offers and the like is to leverage the community. The MNSP community that you alluded to, Don, is a tremendous resource, not only to help you navigate all the logistics of this, but also to think through your business strategy for how to set yourself up for future capabilities. And so the partners here, it's worthy to take some time and look at your options from the MNSP's perspective, see what kind of capabilities they have, see what kind of business expertise they have, and see how they can actually come alongside you and help you navigate all this complexity so that you're set up for the future. But there's great urgency here for all operators. Even if you're not seeing the chargebacks right now, just because they're not there yet doesn't mean they're not coming to you. I mean, think about the retail adoption of EMV. When retailers, and I'm talking about general retailers, adopted EMV, when we started reaching 80-90%, all the fraud shifted. It doesn't go away. It doesn't decrease. It just moves. And in the retail, in a brick and mortar retail scenario, it shifted online, and all that fraud moved online. In this scenario, because there's such a high population of non-EMV compliant operators out there, it's simply the easiest way for fraud to shift is to the non-compliant EMV stores. So those stores who are non-compliant today can expect higher chargebacks, and those stores that don't have any chargebacks today can expect new chargebacks to show up eventually.
And I mean, and you really can't underestimate what you meant, what you said about the urgency of the situation. There's a long waiting list for people to get specialists to come down, technicians to come down and install the retrofit kits. The supply chain issues that the whole country is facing certainly doesn't help. So there's a lot of reasons to not wait any longer.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, let's wrap things up with looking at what opportunities are driving investment in technology in the coming year. Unlike in 2020, when many retailers stated that becoming EMV compliant was their single highest priority, respondents to this year's study listed a broad range of business opportunities when asked about their technology-related priorities for the coming year. So I'm hoping that's because many of them became EMV compliant, and that's why they're moving on to other things. That would be the best case scenario. More than half of retailers said they plan to direct at least part of their tech spending toward improving data security, and nearly half plan to invest in technologies to train employees, improve the use of loyalty data, and to steer customers from the pump into the store. Tim, what do you think about these planned investments? Which ones, in your view, are the most important, and why? And then, how crucial is technology to delivering an improved customer experience?
Don, I will tell you the nature of my role and the way is to try to master and reach a point of saturation in terms of understanding where the technology trends are driving any particular industry. And so I go to conference after conference. I hunger for opportunities to devour research and the like. And of all the research and all the conferences that I've been to, I don't ever recall seeing data security as leading above and beyond the customer engagement and the employee experiences. And so I find, of all of this is the one finding that I find particularly interesting, because it's challenging when you think about cybersecurity, because it's not a topic that a lot of executives, operators are comfortable with. They have a lot of background or expertise or competencies in too as well. And so it rarely gets the attention it deserves. And yet it's the one Achilles heel of kind of the whole retail operations. One ransomware attack that basically locks up your back office is enough to shut you down. Mm-hmm. And so what's really kind of remarkable as you think about it is that the cybersecurity is as important, if not more important, than just locks on your doors to many extent. And what we're seeing in cybersecurity is a fairly meaningful kind of paradigm shift. I mean, when I was working with C-store operators, call it 3-5 years ago, the conversation was always around PCI compliance. Are you doing your daily log analysis? Do you have employee training solutions in play? Are you doing your scanning and the like? Are you PCI compliant so that if you get a data breach, you won't be held liable for those financial losses? That conversation now has shifted, and in part because ransomware has become so prominent now. It's not just about credit card transactions anymore. It's far easier for a bad actor to just basically encrypt your back office and shut you down. Mm-hmm. It basically block your ability to kind of run your C-store because of all the digital dependence. And so now it's much more convenient, the business model is much simpler. I encrypt, instead of trying to steal your credit card information and go through the hassle of putting in skimmers and the like, I'm just going to lock up your PC and ask you for $20,000 if you want it back. And it's that kind of business model that is where it's much more lucrative, much faster, much more efficient for the operators. And so now when we shift away from it, and PCI compliance hasn't gone away, and unfortunately even there we were only at maybe 30% compliant. So we still got an obligation to become PCI compliant, but now on top of that, we need to be thinking about the cybersecurity posture of the entire store. We need to be thinking about the back office. And what's complicating this is, going back to some of your previous findings, is the C-store world is not a simple world anymore. It's very digitally dependent. Online mobile orders, the loyalty engagements, promotions. We know how to do an offline credit card transactions. there's no such thing as an offline loyalty redemption. So when we start thinking about cybersecurity and the network and the infrastructure in place, this starts to introduce a whole kind of new design or a new way of thinking of how that C-store needs to be set up in order to support all these fantastic customer experiences and employee engagement type solutions. So, I think your research here is particularly insightful because it's the first time I've seen cybersecurity top the customer experience or the employee engagement. And I really do believe that it absolutely should, because if you don't get the cybersecurity right, you're going to lose, you potentially could lose everything.
I mean, it only takes a couple of high-profile breaches to put that top of mind, right? It's something. The other thing that I think of when I look at that, whether it's data security and then some of the other things people want to spend money on, it's that very few companies have the luxury of being able to build a technology platform from scratch when they're opening stores. Almost everything that you're doing is layering on to an existing technology system itself, and so the complexities are like multiplied like 10 times, right, in the convenience store business.
Absolutely, and I think that some of the challenges there, and as we start to think through this, is that, we go back to the culture or the nature of the C-store operators. So for so many, I think they do. I've been very impressed with how so many operators manage actually very significant businesses with very limited kind of technology capabilities. But as we start to think through the business model as it's evolving in the future, I mean, there are some meaningful opportunities here as we start to look through some of the elements that you're listing here. Some of the core things like, say, tobacco rebates, for example. This is an area where you need the right technologies in place so that you can get the data to the tobacco manufacturers and get your rebates and get your real-time promotions. So as you start to think through these kinds of things, you want to look at a holistic understanding of kind of where is the profitability of the business and what is the technology that's going to be required in order to support that profitability. What the answer is becoming increasingly now is it is about the technology. It's about the ability to understand your customers. It's about the ability to understand what they want and give them relevant promotions, personalized offers too as well. What's remarkable about the C-store industry today in the market is the fight from other industries. It's not just C-stores looking against competing with other C-stores. It's C-stores competing with dollar stores, C-stores competing with grocery stores, C-stores competing with QSRs. Where's the profitability of the C-store? It's in the prepared food. And who's the number one competitor? It's the QSRs. So think through all the technology solutions that the QSRs, the restaurant industry, the grocery industry, and even the dollar store industry is bringing to their consumers to make life more convenient to them. And that's where the bar is. Because if a customer can get food easier at a C-store, at a QSR than at a C-store, they're already going to the QSR, right? That's the one stat that we keep seeing from NACS over and over again. 36%, I think it's now. It changes from year to year, but the number keeps getting bigger and bigger. Of consumers after they purchase a drink, a beverage from a C-store, their next stop within 30 minutes is a QSR. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to start attacking that KPI? And it's going to be about providing a comparable, if not even better, solution than these other competing industries are providing.
Yep. Yeah, I agree 100%. So frictionless, that's become a buzzword in the industry for the last couple of years, and we've seen a lot of attempts at it. Kind of looking ahead, frictionless self-checkout technology in particular is considered a opportunity as C-store operators look to give customers more control over their shopping experience. So we have Amazon Go's just walk out technology. You have scan and pay. You have lots of other types of technology designed to remove friction from the shopping experience. Of course, convenience stores have a lot at stake in there because convenience is in the name of the stores. I mean, it's all about convenience. So what would you say is working, what's not, and what is likely to be the preferred technology of the future when it comes to frictionless technology, Tim?
There's a number of things that very quickly come to mind, right? When you think about frictionless, it's about enabling the customer to basically take care of themselves so that they can get out even faster. So we think about kiosk solutions, which, there have been C-store brands. I think the kiosk offering, was born. I would even argue with certain C-store brands in terms of their ability to take emerging technology. And this is the impressive part about the C-store industry. I mean, when I think about when the kiosk become kind of mainstream and deployed at scale and actually have a meaningful business impact on revenue, it was in the C-store industry. And it's those kinds of solutions. So when we think about frictionless, one is the kiosk, the self-order. Well, maybe we should say one is the mobile app. Then we go to the kiosk. But I think for some of the things that you were highlighting here, it's about, we're talking about the checkout. And we're talking about how do you make the checkout more functional, faster, and the like. And there's a couple of ways to think about that. And it's different solutions for different C-stores, right? There are been some very impressive implementations where it's just a very modest amount of technology in order to enable that mobile checkout. As simple as opening up a mobile app, scanning the items, and then scanning a QR code on your way out. I mean, it can be that simple, that small. All the way to the equivalent of what you see in the grocery store, self-checkouts, where you have a little station, you go, you scan your products, and then you walk out the door and you essentially check yourself out. I think what's interesting here is when we start thinking about some of the computer vision enabled kind of solutions that you were mentioning before. And this is where I think there's a lot of interesting activity that's taking place with the larger brands that I've seen so far to date, where it's more about the ability to leverage computer vision and computer vision's IoT sensors throughout the store to kind of understand what the customer is doing. So when you think about the C-store, the big advantage, if you will, is the footprint, the sheer number of brick and mortar points of presence and kind of where they're at. The disadvantage of C-stores is the size of the store. You're orders of magnitude smaller than the grocery. You're talking hundreds or thousands of square feet instead of tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of square feet, which means that you need to be even smarter now about how to use that smaller footprint. Bigger, more number of stores, but that smaller footprint. And I think with the computer vision solutions, not only do they facilitate a very elegant experience, I go in, I open my app, I grab a bunch of things, and I just walk out. It also gives the operator an understanding of what are you doing in the store? Where are you going? And what products do you touch in what order? And what products lead to what other products? And how do you build your baskets? And more importantly, which products are you putting back that you need to be persuaded to keep? And so it's those kinds of insights that you don't get with a typical POS transaction data. The POS transaction data only tells you what a customer's actually bought. It doesn't really give you any understanding of what they're doing in your store or what they thought about doing or thought about purchasing. And so as we start thinking about some of these frictionless solutions, not only do they provide the opportunity to dramatically improve the customer experience, it also gives you another order of magnitude of insight into what the customer is doing in the store so that the operator can make the appropriate adjustments to optimize their portfolio in their limited footprint to maximize their business opportunity with the customer.
Yeah. And it's reflected in the results here, which are very widely split here, with 35% of respondents planning to add self-checkout using kiosks, another 35% planning to add self-checkout through AI and sensors, and 28% adding using an app, a digital app to check out. So it's I don't think the final word is there, or like you said, everybody's solution is going to be different for the depending on the retailer. So. But it's a very interesting future when you look at this whole checkout, and the labor shortage probably makes retailers want to look at this even more because of the trouble the retailers are having hiring. And we know a lot of C-stores have closed their third shift because of not having employees to work it. So
I appreciate you bringing that up, because we didn't talk very much about IoT or the labor shortage and the like. And that is a very meaningful and kind of fundamental challenge that we're looking at here. And so it's another area where we talk about technology in terms of improving the customer experience, improving the engagement with the employees. But as it relates to retail operations, we're in a market context right now where, to your point, we simply do not have enough labor to keep the stores open. And so it's a matter of survival to some extent. And so looking at IoT, things that were considered to be a luxury in terms of retail operations now become an immediate necessity. What can be done to take off another hour of paperwork off of the store manager, off of the frontline employees, so that they can spend more time with the consumer? And every little opportunity, whether it be, say, tank gauge data from collecting the tank gauge data from a compliance perspective, to just understanding when the bathrooms need to be cleaned and when they don't, or even knowing when a freezer has gone offline and you're about to lose all your milk products or your egg products and the like. All of those opportunities for technology to kind of improve the business, to minimize the operational overhead, if you will, and while improving the profitability of the business, are now in play, when before it was just kind of a nice to have.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Hey, listen, thank you for helping me present these highlights, Tim. As we begin today's Q&A, please remember to submit your questions using the Q&A feature on the left side of your screen. Also, if we run out of time before getting to your question, Tim will get back to you privately with a response. Also, please remember to fill out the evaluation survey that will automatically appear on your screen at the conclusion of the event. Okay, now let's take a look at what questions we have here. Hold on, I just find it. Okay, here's one interesting one. Tim, how is FSMA the FSMA 204 Act affecting the C-store market?
So FSMA is the Food Safety Modernization Act. And as we think about the C-store and kind of some of the things that we talked about throughout the presentation, it's a whole new discipline. It's a whole new center of profitability. It's the main source of profitability in the retail operations. And so as we start thinking about, food safety, it raises now the question of, how are C-stores, which, for the most part, were in many cases focused on prepackaged kind of food items, now going to enter this world of kind of hot prepared foods and to do it well. And so I think it's another discipline, a skill set that C-stores may not have had necessarily before, in contrast to, say, the QSR industry, where it's all been about food safety. And we can see all the horror stories of kind of what's happening in those kind of scenarios. So my encouragement to the C-store operators is, one, we know that food, hot prepared food specifically, is going to become a major source of profitability in this market. And your ability to sell hot prepared foods is dependent on your ability to comply with food safety requirements to a large extent. And so it's going to be learning this discipline, learning this skill set, and that's not a trivial element, because it's a whole new business model, if you will, that all your employees, all your operators now need to be thinking about. And there's a lot of technology from an IoT perspective in terms of maintaining proper temperature of your foods, understanding spoilage, and those kind of elements too as well. But at the end of the day, it's a new business model. And so there's a meaningful obligation in terms of training and just policies that are going to be required for the C-store operators to embrace this.
Absolutely right. Okay, next question is, what is the source of the chargebacks in the case of EMV compliance? Is it based upon fraud occurring at the pump payment terminal?
Yes. Yeah. So, you want to think about that scenario as someone's basically stolen cards off the dark web. They've created a bunch of fraudulent credit card swipers, and then they've gone to your store to basically pump, tank loads of fuel. And because your store did not support EMV chip transactions, there was not that extra level of protection of an EMV chip transaction, because the fraudsters, I know possible to kind of to create fraudulent EMV chips, but it's difficult, very difficult, and it's almost not worth the effort. So it's this is one of those situations where if you don't need to outrun the bear, you need to outrun everybody else. Yeah, with EMV, you need to be EMV compliant. If you're not accepting that EMV transaction at the dispenser, if you allow a person to take a fraudulent credit card on a max stripe basis only to swipe through, uh, your bank will hold you accountable for all of that fraud. That's the big paradigm shift, if you will, that has taken place. It's no longer the consumer's bank that was responsible for the fraud and the transactions. It is now the merchant that is going to be held responsible for these fraudulent transactions.
Right, right, and that's especially for a smaller retailer. That's could be a lot of liability.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any need of digitizing the food supply chain in a C-store environment? I assume it has to do with arriving, or safe food safety, as well as things arriving on time and spoilage and things like that.
I would say yes. And actually, my answer is based not on what I've been doing in the C-store industry, but actually looking at the restaurant industry. So I study both of these industries because I find the transformation of these industries very much aligned with each other, very much relevant to each other. And so what I see in the QSR industry specifically is a lot of supply chain challenges. And so what they're looking to do is kind of digitize that supply chain so that they can understand when I order, 100 items of whatever ingredient and only 50 show up. Well, what do I do with those 50 so that I can direct it to the appropriate place, to whatever stores are within my brand to maximize my business opportunity? Or if I get an oversupply of one order, whatever the case may be, then how do I proactively promote items related to those ingredients so that I can get them off my hands and maximize my business opportunity there too as well? So we talked a little bit earlier about, from a C-store perspective, it's a much smaller footprint than a lot of the other competitors that are running for competing and gunning for that share of stomach with the consumer. So by digitizing the supply chain, this opens up more opportunity now to basically optimize your ability, particularly in today's age, and it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon, to basically deal with a dynamic, disrupted, fluctuating supply chain, unreliable for supply chain, for lack of a better terms. And so whoever can make the most of whatever they're given is going to win. And digitizing that supply chain, using AI to develop the kind of patterns of consumption and then adjust to whatever patterns of supply is going to be a very powerful competitive advantage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Let's see. What is a practical technology stack for a starter IoT solution in the C-store? For example, wireless networks, gateway, sensors.
That's an interesting question. I would say, what I see most commonly, and from a starter perspective, where the conversation usually starts for me is with the tank gauge. Almost every C-store already has an ATG, an automatic tank gauge today. That's just part of the business. Now the question is, when it comes to compliance, when it comes to understanding and maximizing your fuel volumes, that seems to be a very natural place to start. In terms of fuel is the lifeblood of a C-store, and being able to maximize seems to be a very easy business model of saying, if I can understand how to better, more efficiently optimize my fuel. I don't want thousands of gallons of fuel sitting in the tanks unnecessarily. That's capital that I could be using to invest in my C-store. So it seems like a very easy place for most C-stores, because everybody has a tank gauge, is to start looking at how might I basically be able to kind of optimize my fuel inventories. Secondly, I would say that another additional easy place to set up would be as it relates to the freezers. Because so much of the supply in terms of your inventories, your perishables, if you sell those perishables, can be lost if a freezer goes out. And it's a simpler thing to kind of put an IoT sensor in the freezer, understand that at 2 o'clock in the morning, store 1, 2, 3, freezer 4 is down, and store manager, it's worth your while to wake up, get out there, and move all that product to another freezer before you have to throw it away. So it's these kinds of business cases, if you will. And the answer is going to be, it depends. It's going to depend on kind of what your tech stack looks like today and what you can do today, and then versus where your business would most benefit in the future.
Great. And we've got time, I think, for one more question. Let's see. How do you see technology changing the amount of labor required in a store? do you see a different labor model needed to compete with QSR locations and other C-stores in the future?
That's a very interesting question, and I think that question, it's helpful to think about that question across industries, right? Instead of just thinking about it solely on the C-store, you want to think about that as it relates to the market at large. So your ability to get labor is not just a matter of being able to find somebody qualified to run and operate in the C-store. It's, that is a very specific type of employee, someone who knows how to card everything for age verified products and the like. But the competition for the person who's going to sit behind your register is also considering and thinking about becoming an Uber driver or a third DoorDash. You want to think about that gig economy type of player. And then you want to think about all the other types of potential alternatives like the QSR industry too as well. What I see interesting, what I think is very interesting, is the amount of technology that's coming in to address the labor shortage. And I see this in the retail side as well as in the restaurant, not so much in the C-store. I do expect it to reach the C-store, but it's that idea of being able to be flexible with my labor, to share my labor across so for the multi-unit operator to be able to kind of create a marketplace, if you will, for shifts and the like, so that employees can come up very quickly and say, and I'm free tonight, can I sign up for this job, this shift or that shift, or for store managers to be able to say, I've got someone who at the last minute isn't going to show, and how can I quickly kind of fulfill that need, either with existing within my internal employee first. But if that's not even possible, then to go to third-party kind of gig economy resources that are certified to work in that. So I think as we think through the gig economy, and as I think about how technology is going to change, it's not only a matter of shift scheduling and the like. I would also put up on there the payroll too as well. I'm seeing some really meaningful innovations as it relates to same-day pay. And so as a consumer, as an employee, with the opportunity to work at your store where I have to wait 2 weeks to get my paycheck versus to work with Uber or work with another grocery store, for example, that offers same-day pay, that as soon as I finish my 8-hour shift, I have a deposit into my account that I can use immediately. So many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. It's not a question of preference. It's a question of need. And for so many, they need that paycheck at the end of the day. And so that's going to be another area of differentiation of competition, because it's now about the employee experience, being able to meet the employee's needs too as well. And that's where technology on the back end is going to make a very meaningful difference as well.
Great. Okay. I don't see any more questions, and we're just about coming up to an hour, a couple of minutes short of an hour. So I want to thank everybody on the whole audience. Thank you for attending today's webcast. This was the 2021 Tech Study, Bridging the Digital Divide, sponsored by Hughes Network Systems. More in-depth version of the study is available at www.csnews.com. It was published in our September issue. You can get our digital September issue online. Again, I want to thank Hughes Network Systems for sponsoring this webcast, and special thanks to our guest, Tim Tang of Hughes Network Systems. Tim, it was just great having you on, and thank you for lending your insight to these numbers.
Don, I really enjoyed the opportunity, and thank you.
Okay, so a big thank you to our audience for your time, and I wish you all to have a great day.